During the Second World War, pilots encountered strange phenomena they called Foo Fighters. Were these simply experimental enemy aircraft, or something altogether more bizarre? Join myself and Neil as we explore this fascinating subject from history.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Welcome listeners to Aliens Explored with me, Stu Jackson.
And me, Neil Kelly.
And this week we will be discussing, and you'll like this one, Neil, as a military intelligence person, we're discussing the Foo Fighters from World War II. And now, to be fair, you weren't military intelligence in World War II, were you?
Well, you know, that's a moot point, actually. That depends on when you decide World War II ended. You know, if World War II was all about, well, we went to war because the Nazis invaded, or the Nazis and the Soviet Union jointly invaded Poland, that was the casus belli, that was the reason we went to war, well then, yeah, that war hadn't ended by the time I was in the military in Germany. That didn't end until 1989 or 90. So, you know...
I think the generally recognised, or at least for us laymen, end of World War II was 47. Am I saying that right?
45. No.
45.
VE Day, 8th of May 1945. That's when we declared victory 45. In Europe.
That's when we declared victory.
That's when we declared victory.
Whether we were victorious or not, we declared it.
We declared that we had been victorious in Europe. It's funny, going to France, going to the west coast, there's a little town called Moyeron-en-Pered, which is a village, basically a ghost town, but it's significant because it's the birthplace of the Prime Minister, the French Prime Minister during the First World War, a guy called Clemenceau, and another guy whose name I can't remember, I should have researched this, who was a hero of the Second World War. He was in the resistance, and then he escaped. He joined the Free French and he fought for the liberation of France. And then after the war, he was made supreme commander of French forces in the Far East. So he basically oversaw the Vietnam or the Indochine debacle, in which his son, a lieutenant, was killed. He's the only guy from that village who was killed during the French invention in World War II. But there's a monument there, the monument to les deux victoires, the two victories in the First and Second World War. And I think, well, that's a bit rich, the French declaring a victory in both those wars, but actually probably we do the same, really.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And as I've got a French partner and you're about to go to France, we ought to be careful what we say.
that we have no more right to declare a victory than the French have, really.
Absolutely. But yeah, so World War II, the reason I mention World War II, of course, is where this term Foo Fighters came from. Now, to give a little bit of sort of peek backstage for our listeners, so the way we work these episodes is we'll record an episode, or we'll record two episodes together, and then I'll tell Neil what our next two episodes are going to be about, and then we'll each go away for a week and we'll do lots and lots of research, about those subjects. But when I said to you that we were going to be talking about Foo Fighters, Neil, was that a phrase you were already familiar with?
Yes, it was.
Your background?
Although when I tried to look it up online, of course, it's all about the American grunge band. The Foo Fighters. So you have to specify World War II Foo Fighters. But yes, I had heard the term, and I knew that was where the band took their name from.
Okay, so before we get into kind of what we've got on research, what did you know, or what was your impression about Foo Fighters, having heard the term prior to discussions in depth about UFOs?
All I'd heard was some reports that Allied pilots during the Second World War, I said, in the latter stages of the Second World War, although apparently it was going on much earlier, had seen these strange lights in the sky. They were being trailed by these lights, which in some cases terrified them, because you're a pilot going over enemy territory, especially if you're a bomber command, where your chances of survival are pretty slim. And suddenly you see something in the sky you can't identify. Well, that's pretty terrifying. And it was, of course, assumed to be a Nazi secret weapon. But yeah, that's what I'd learned about the Foo Fighters. They had spotted these entities in the sky which had trailed them, which had seemed to fly to follow them in the sky, to sometimes follow an erratic path. That they didn't engage any Allied planes. They didn't try and attack them. Allied planes weren't capable of attacking them because they could move too fast. They were far too manoeuvrable, and at a given moment they would just shoot off up into the heavens and be gone. So that's what I knew about Foo Fighters.
See, right. So I suppose I'm asking a bit of a leading question in asking you this, because I think Foo Fighters is an example of society's collective, I'm going to use big words now, cognitive dissonance. Which cognitive dissonance, for those listeners who aren't familiar with it, is when a person, or in this case a society, believes two conflicting or contradicting pieces of information. So you get many people who are just totally, UFOs, it's a load of nonsense. The idea of flying saucers, no, it's rubbish. And then you talk about the Foo Fighters, and it's like, I know these UFOs and flying saucers followed these aeroplanes. It's like, well, how can you accept both? So I was leading you down a bit of a dark alley with that one.
Well, I mean, Foo Fighters, the etymology of the term, the nonsense word foo emerged in popular culture during the early 1930s, first being used by cartoonist Bill Holman, who peppered his Smokey Stover fireman cartoon strips, who apparently his catchphrase was, "Where there's foo, there's fire." Doesn't mean anything. I don't understand what he means, but apparently the phrase caught on. So when they saw these strange lights in the sky, they decided to call them Foo Fighters. Of course, this was before the term flying saucer came into being, which was in about 1947, I think, an encounter with a US pilot over Roswell. He described a flying saucer, and then from the early 50s onwards, they started to talk about UFOs as opposed to flying saucers.
Well, the etymology of flying saucer was actually a pilot describing the way these flying discs, and he called them flying discs, moved, was like if you were to skip a saucer across water. That's where the term flying saucers comes from.
Okay.
Not
spin it on the end of a pole.
Right. So no, nothing like that. It wasn't, the flying saucer wasn't to describe its shape; it was actually to describe its movement. But it's since come into the vernacular.
So sort of wobbly movement and
sort of a wobbly, when you skim a stone across water. That was the movement he was trying to describe.
Okay.
So it might have been called skimming saucers instead of flying saucers. But So now you've had the opportunity, obviously, to do a bit more research into it. What's your take on?
Well, initially I thought,
the
Nazis were very well advanced in their weapon systems. They developed. I mean, they had. I mean, if you look at Wikipedia, what the Nazis called the Wunderwaffe, or what the Hitler called die Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapons, especially after the catastrophe of Stalingrad. He believed, when it became apparent that their 1,000-year Reich wasn't likely to last 1,000 days, he put his faith in these Wunderwaffe, these wonder weapons, secret weapons that would turn the tide of the war. And their development was quite impressive. When you think from a war that started with cavalry charges on horseback and biplanes, that suddenly you've got jet planes, rocket planes, drones, and ballistic missiles towards the end of the war. And the Nazis were far more advanced than the Allies in the development of those. So there were things in the sky that pilots hadn't seen before. Although, I mean, apparently when pilots first saw the V1 doodlebugs, the flying bombs, the pilot who first saw one thought it was a German plane that had already been shot down because of the amount of what he saw as smoke coming out the back of it. Didn't realise it was actually a rocket-powered drone on its way to its target. Obviously, with the ballistic missiles, they also the Germans developed. I mean, they had all sorts of jet planes, rocket planes, turbojets, ramjets. I'm talking like I know the difference between the two, but they developed the jet fighter bomber, the Messerschmitt 262, which was quite impressive in combat. It was the only jet aircraft in combat during the Second World War. Britain did develop the Gloucester Meteor, but wouldn't fly it over enemy territory. It was used for defending the home shores only, for fear that it would fall into enemy hands, even though the enemy already had something as I mean, if you see a Messerschmitt Me-262, it looks like a modern jet fighter bomber. You wouldn't be surprised to see something like that in the 21st century. It could fly 100 miles an hour faster than anything the Allies had. I don't think there's any record of one ever being shot down. They were used as bombers. They carried out a bombing raid on Antwerp without losing a single plane, which, in those days of the war, was kind of unheard of. And they also had a rocket plane, which does look odd. It was a sort of stubby little thing, the Messerschmitt 163 Comet, spelt with a K. This was an interceptor that could be launched and fly to a great height. I think it could reach speeds of 1,000 kilometres per hour, pretty much faster than anything the Allies had. And basically the thing would be shot straight up into Allied bomber formations to shoot them down. It was an extremely dangerous plane to fly. It was powered by liquid rocket fuel. But as I say, the Nazis had these things in the sky.
Yes.
As well as ballistic missiles.
They did have some weird and wonderful things, and in fact, in a couple of episodes' time, we will be discussing the potential origin of some of the stranger things that the Nazis flew in World War II. So listen out for that coming up. But back on with the Foo Fighters, though. So I can understand how Allied pilots would automatically go in their heads to, okay, it's some sort of Nazi secret weapon, but we can look back historically, nearly 80 years later, and we know what was around. We know technologically what we can do today that doesn't match what these things could do. So we're talking about incredibly fast-moving, round, glowing objects. Now, none of those things that you've just listed there would meet the description of a round glowing object. Yes, some of them are way faster, much faster than our Allied planes, but they don't have the manoeuvrability to sort of circle them the way these Foo Fighters did. Nowadays we've become familiar with stealth technology, but of course stealth technology, if it existed at all back then, was in its absolute infancy. And
I'm not sure that it exists.
Appear on radar.
I'm not sure that it exists.
Well, no, exactly. Well, again, that's that's something we'll be coming on to in a couple of episodes, so we don't want too many spoilers. But these Foo Fighters certainly didn't appear on radar. So you've got these lights, balls of light that are effectively playing with Allied planes,
but not attacking them.
That's
crucially not attacking them, which a Nazi secret weapon
like
would
Nazi
do.
technology. Oh, you'd think so. Otherwise, what's the point of it?
Well, I did read about Nazi UFOs, that they had developed some kind of flying saucer or a disc-shaped, a non-rotating disc-shaped craft. There was.
Is that the Hanabu? Is it Hanabu?
What's it called? This was a non-rotating disc developed at Breslau by a V2 rocket engineer, Richard Mita, which was captured by the Soviets while Mita fled to the US via France and ended up working for Avro. Now, in the 1950s, Avro developed, Avro Canada in 1953 announced it was developing the VZ9AV Avro car, which was a circular jet aircraft with an estimated speed of 1,500 miles per hour, 2,400 kilometers per hour. German engineer Georg Klein claimed that such designs had been developed during the Nazi era. Klein identified two types of supposed Nazi flying discs. Now, also when you're talking about the Nazi flying discs, you're also talking about how the Nazis had made contact with extraterrestrials. They used these to fly down to the Antarctic, and apparently the Nazis believed in a hollow Earth, so they're living in this hollow Earth underneath Antarctica. That's a whole other can of worms we're opening there. But the idea,
really is.
the idea of a saucer-shaped or a disc-shaped craft. Well, we don't have those now. We don't. You look at any kind of aeroplane; it's still the same basic shape as the earliest craft. It has two wings. It has a tail, and it faces, and it follows basic laws of aerodynamics.
Yes, the one I was thinking of was the Honebu. You have to forgive my pronunciation. You're the one that speaks German. Honebu 2, I believe it was called. Haunebu.
Haun.
Nebu.
Haunebu. Oh yes, I saw it somewhere. Haunebu, yeah.
Yes, that's what. But that never actually really, pardon the pun, took off. Anyway, but also, what you're talking about there is flying saucers. Now, with the Foo Fighters, we're not talking about flying saucers. We're not talking about disc-shaped craft. We're talking about glowing balls of light.
Presumably, all these were seen at night. They wouldn't have seen glowing balls of light in the daytime. I mean, I believe it was a particular night fighter squadron that someone who coined the term Foo Fighter.
It was the 415th Night Fighter Squadron. Now, I've got to believe that they do fly during the day as well. Night Fighter Squadron's going to be their name, surely. I couldn't say for certain, but yeah, I mean, these things are going to be easier to see at night anyway. So yes, but yeah, in November '44, you're absolutely right. The crew of a Bristol Beaufighter in the 415th spotted probably the most famous Foo Fighter experience, where they spotted they reckon about 8 to 10 bright orange lights flying off the left wing. Again, no radar. They turned towards the lights, and then the lights disappeared. Then they reappeared further away, and this sort of continued, this almost cat and mouse game where they would turn towards the lights would disappear, then they'd reappear somewhere else, they'd turn towards them to investigate them again, and then they'd disappear again. But whilst they're there, they're incredibly manoeuvrable. They're travelling at high speed. That's not Nazi technology.
It's not Nazi technology, no. Well, it's I mean, there have
It's
been
also displaying intelligence. It's an intelligent reaction. Okay,
Yeah.
every time you veer towards me, I'm going to disappear and I'm going to reappear somewhere else. That is an intelligent reaction.
Yeah.
That's not a natural phenomenon. And you know, these are experienced pilots and crew. You know, they will be familiar
the last
with...
thing I'll say about... Sorry? So the last thing I say about the Nazis wanting to test a secret weapon was, for instance, if the Allies, if the Americans or the Russians or the British wanted to test a secret aerial weapon, they had space to do it outside the combat zone. The Americans could test something over the Nevada desert. The Russians could test something over Siberia. Even the Brits could test something over Scotland or Ireland. But the Germans, all their airspace was in the war zone. So anything they put up in the sky is going to likely encounter enemy aircraft. So,
Okay,
if they were testing, if they were testing something, that's the only place they've got to test it.
Okay, but if this is a Nazi secret weapon, you know, why do we not know about these glowing balls of light that fly around now? 80 years later. Why can we not recreate that technology?
Well, there have been a lot of discussions over the discrepancy between what the pilots thought they saw and what they actually saw. There's a Dr. Edgar Winacker, who was the prime flight psychologist on the project, summarised the need for a cohesive and systemic outline of the epidemiology of aviators' vertigo. As he described it, pilots do not have sufficient information about phenomena of disorientation, and as a corollary are given considerable disorganised, incomplete and inaccurate information, largely dependent on their own experience, which they would supplement with stories they've heard from other pilots. So it's largely anecdotal evidence being woven into a kind of story that agrees. And one of the things the Dr. Winacker says about pilots is, since aviators are not skilled observers of human behaviour, they usually have only the vaguest understanding of their own feelings. Like other naive persons, therefore, they have simply adopted a term to cover a multitude of otherwise inexplicable events. That is, that the evidence is anecdotal, and the pilots have maybe discussed it amongst themselves and have come up with this thing that they all agreed that they saw.
Okay. But there's still, in those cases, there still has to be a trigger event. There has to be a collective event. They all have to have seen something. And all right, you know, I can fully accept that the details can get swayed in discussion and debate, and people misremembering or remembering things under prompt. Absolutely. But they all had to have seen something that wasn't easily explainable.
Now, were planes fitted with radar by the later stages of the war? I know that there were German night fighters that had radar.
I don't believe I don't believe this particular one was fitted with radar. No, but
so all they've got is a visual. And of course, these pilots are going to be highly attuned, aren't they? They're flying into enemy territory. They're quite likely to die. They're quite likely to be shot down by flak or by an enemy fighter.
Sorry, I stand corrected. No, there was airborne radar. That didn't register anything, nor ground control didn't register anything either. So no, in the case of the Bristol Beaufighter crew in 1944, yes, it appears they did have radar. Looking at the evidence,
but it didn't show anything.
Didn't show anything. So the kind of thing that you're describing there might affect the number of lights. So let's say one person saw 4 lights, another person goes and says, do you know what, I'm absolutely certain there were 6. You think, could I have missed? Yeah, because maybe, now two of them did look a bit bigger, so maybe two were behind those two. So yeah, all right, I can see that there were six, and they changed their story and they changed their recollection of the story accordingly. That might apply to the number of them. It might apply to the colour of them. It might apply to the size of them. It might even apply to the manoeuvrability. But something as fundamental as there is a light that we can't explain has to predominantly be there. If there was more, let's say, for example, it was the tail flame from a rocket. I don't know what the correct term would be, that they were actually seeing. But somebody else would have seen the rocket, even if someone else only saw the tail flame. So they would say, oh, actually, there was a rocket at the front. Oh, do you know what? Now I remember. Yeah, there was a rocket. So they would all collectively have seen the rocket.
Yeah, I mean, but
rather
a rocket
than the opposite way.
A rocket wouldn't have trailed them. A rocket wouldn't have flown erratically. A rocket would have been a tail fire. Would have been a light going up into the sky and up into the stratosphere and over the horizon. The fire from a V1 would be probably fairly low flying in a straight line. The tail fire from a German jet or rocket plane would be coming to attack them.
Well, that's it. But what the point I'm making there is that this idea of sort of collective rewriting of the story, yes, I accept that is very much a psychological phenomenon, but also very, very limited. You're talking about fine details that would get shared and misremembered. You're not talking about the actual fundamental, like them disappearing and then reappearing. Yeah, I'm struggling with that one.
Now, one natural phenomenon that was brought up was something called St Elmo's fire, which is a weather phenomenon in which luminous plasma is created by a corona discharge from a sharp or pointed object in a strong electrical field in the atmosphere.
Yes. Have you ever seen St Elmo's fire?
No.
It's a really bizarre thing. So you'll get, you basically, if you're in an area where it exists, you'll hold up your hand and you get this blue glow around your fingers. That looks like a form of flame, but you don't feel it or anything like that. Yeah. It's not balls of light.
No. What about
ball lightning? Would be a better explanation.
Yes. Yeah.
But ball lightning doesn't veer course. It doesn't disappear and reappear every time you head towards it. I know plasma. Balls of plasma, which is effectively what ball lightning is, does move, and it can move very, very fast, but it has a tendency just to move in a single direction. It'll appear, move in one direction for a period of time, then disappear. It doesn't veer course. It doesn't disappear and reappear elsewhere. I mean, ball lightning is a particular... So I actually know a little bit about this because ball lightning is quite often seen around crop circle formations. Okay. Which is a
particular,
so it's not meeting the. Also, ball lightning is white in colour, or it's a bluish white. It looks like you would expect electricity to look like. It's plasma, but it's not orange. It's not red as these lights were described. Bright orange lights.
There were also pilots who spotted aerial phenomena in the Pacific theatre of operations against the Japanese, but they saw something that looked a bit different, more like a large glowing ball. But again, yes. it was aerial phenomena that didn't show up on the radar, couldn't be explained.
I think it's reasonable to look at each account on its own merits. But what What fascinates me most of all, and we're going to talk really generically now about the Foo Fighters being the catch-all term in this case for UFO experience for World War II pilots. It's the sheer quantity of them. The sheer number of them. It became such a common experience that it was given this name, Foo Fighters. It's, to be given a catch-all name like that means it's a very common experience.
Yeah.
And I find that absolutely fascinating.
But was it given a common name in the context of someone says, well, I can see some lights off our port side, and the pilot would just say, oh, don't worry about it, it's just Foo Fighters. It's just this thing we see every now and then, it's just lights in the sky, it won't harm us. Ignore it.
Even if that's the case, then if that was an isolated incident, then that name would just drop out of usage anyway.
Oh, no, I mean, because it was in such common usage that pilots are basically saying, don't worry about it, it's just Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters doesn't mean... I mean, Foo is a nonsense word. Foo Fighters aren't actually going to do anything. It's just the thing we think we see.
So for that to become a thing, then they would say, oh yeah, it's just Foo Fighters. I mean, this is... Like I said, when they first encountered these things, it was terrifying to them. So for it to be such a common occurrence, the pilots are just dismissing it out of hand.
Well, it was terrifying for them because they'd seen an unidentified object in the sky over enemy territory where they're quite likely to be attacked, where survival rates are very, very low for these pilots. They're lucky if they survive a tour of duty. Anything they can see that they can't identify, that's going to scare the crap out of them. Not because they're thinking, oh, this is something otherworldly, but because this is something we haven't seen before, and it's probably going to kill us.
Well, yeah, but then from that to then become such a common day occurrence that it's dismissed.
Yeah,
that means it's happening a lot.
Yeah, that we've seen this.
Probably more than has been reported.
We've seen these things. There are lights in the sky. We can't explain them. Nothing shows up on the radar, and they don't do anything. They might follow us for a bit. They might dance around us, but they're not going to do anything. So
that's the other thing as well. Odd. If it's that easily dismissed, if they become very blasé about, oh yeah, don't worry, it's Foo Fighters, that means that that a hell of a lot of them are going to go unreported. As well. So how many experiences were there in reality compared to what we actually know about?
I don't know. I imagine they just report it as routine. There's a pilot, you're going to be reporting everything. Okay, we're on target. We're at this location. Foo Fighters on the starboard side. Nothing to worry about. 3 of them, been trailing us for the last 20 minutes. And now they're gone.
Would they report it though? If it's that common an experience?
Oh, I mean,
would they report? Oh, today I saw a cloud that looked like a pyramid.
Oh yeah,
they wouldn't report that.
Not that, but I mean, they would report things like, well, my wings are icing up. I'm deploying de-icer.
Right,
that sort of thing. So all the routine stuff. They would report anything that seemed like a potential enemy. Okay, well, there's something on our starboard side. Oh, it's just Foo Fighters. Don't worry about it. Or maybe you got an inexperienced pilot saying, oh shit, there's something on the left-hand side, or something on our port side, and a more experienced pilot say, oh yeah, we've seen that before, it's just Foo Fighters, don't worry.
Yeah. See, that I don't know, that makes it a smoking gun.
Yeah, we don't know what it is, but it can't harm us. Well, it doesn't seem to do any harm.
So let's summarise where we stand then on the subject of Foo Fighters. So I remain utterly convinced that these were intelligently controlled. I'm absolutely convinced it was otherworldly because it's technology beyond our capabilities today, and it was 80 years ago. And it was so common. And, the fact that it was happening around events in a global war, well, that would get the we've said before, I can't say that these are extraterrestrials from another planet. I can't say these are time travel. I don't know. All we can say is they're otherworldly. But a global war to the scale that we were talking, I can definitely imagine that getting a lot of interest from otherworldly visitors. So yeah, I can see these things following planes and analysing them and seeing what they're up to. Yeah, I'd remain absolutely convinced that these were otherworldly, otherworldly in origin. How about yourself?
Well, I'm thinking if it was a secret weapon, it's one that hasn't been identified since the war. If it was some kind of natural phenomenon, some kind of meteorological phenomenon, well, it goes a bit beyond what can be described by known meteorological phenomena. So it's a big question mark. Otherworldly is a possibility, because what does that leave? It's still something we can't explain.
So there you have it, listeners. Could it be that we're bringing Neil round to our way of thinking, or have we missed something far more mundane and more obvious? Do tweet us and let us know what you think. Don't forget to join us next time when we will be discussing the 2006 O'Hare Airport incident. Join us then. Take care for now.
Bye bye.
Aliens Explored is a Feegle Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Maffucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter or Facebook by searching Aliens Explored, or visit us on aliensexplored.com.